As promised, we will now hear from Lyndon LaRouche himself. The first segment of 4 is on Lyndon LaRouche, the statesman, the man who should have become the President of the United States. We will have time after hearing from Lynn and then after hearing from Helga for a question and answer period. I would urge people to send those questions to the questions@schillerinstitute.org in any language you choose, and we will do our best to have those questions addressed. And as you listen to LaRouche, if you ever had a question that you wanted to ask Lynn, do it, because Helga will be here.
This nation was founded as a republic. Not a republic in the sense of Republican Party with a big R, but as a republic in fact. It was founded because the predecessors and influences on our founding fathers believed that the world must live to a moral purpose, believed that a nation in the world must live to a moral purpose, and believed that the individual within the nation must be developed and must live like the nation, within the nation, to achieve a moral purpose in their own existence. You and I, when we're stripped of all our titles, we're stripped of all the things that distinguish one from the other in terms of the amount of money or prestige or comfort or whatnot, we're all simply people. We're simply a collection of individuals bound together properly by a common moral purpose, attempting to help one another to that moral purpose, each living so that the outcome of that period between birth and our death, whenever that should come, that should mean something. That in the course of our life, we should have laid a meaningful foundation for which our children, other people's children, and the next generations beyond that, our so-called posterity, can build better than we have built. Our nation has now come to a point of crisis. We are either going to begin moving up, or we are going to continue moving down. We might be in a depression. We might even be in thermonuclear war very soon. I think the people of this nation, in large part, are ready to respond to that challenge, ready to bring forth within themselves that deeper moral commitment which guided our founding fathers in making this a republic. What the people of this nation require is the knowledge that a significant institution exists through which they, as citizens, may make their lives politically efficient to turn this nation around from a course of disaster back toward the purposes of a republic. The voters in the state of New Hampshire, despite the New York Times and what it says about New Hampshire, the voters of New Hampshire have a singular chance to mortgage the entire national presidential election campaign to my candidacy. And once my candidacy becomes established in New Hampshire as potentially the winning candidacy in the nation, on that basis, we can arouse the good people of this nation and turn this around. I ask you to join with me in that purpose and that dedication. And I thank you for being here.
Now, Roosevelt promised to Churchill at the Atlantic meeting and the Casablanca meeting, he said, no more will the United States fight world wars to save the British Empire in any shape or guise. No more will the United States tolerate the British system, whether colonial or neo-colonial. No more will the United States tolerate the economics of Adam Smith in any part of the world. We are going to take this aching, poor, hungry world, and we're going to transform it with American methods. We're going to transform it by export and development of high technology. We're going to have Manhattan projects and NASA projects and every dirigist, federally directed, scientific Christ program that we deem necessary. You know, some people talk about how many nuclear plants can you build. Understand American methods. If I want to build 10,000 nuclear plants by the year 2000, we'll do it. It can be done. If we putter along the way we'd like to do it, it won't happen. You want to have 50 or 100 nuclear starts a year, we can do it. Just take the table of requirements. We need how many steel plants, how many of this, build them all, right now. If we have to melt down the neon signs on the whorehouses to do it. But the reality is that most children have the potentiality to be a genius. We know in the next order of learning that after the child's mind has been given a foundation by learning the music of Bach and Beethoven, or at least that method, which is indispensable if you're going to produce geniuses. The next thing is geometry. And once they've learned geometry, we're going to teach them physics. What, at the age of 8, 9, and 10? I do not want a single child of this nation to reach the age of 16 in the future without being a qualified genius in physics. We need that, and it can be done.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce to you the Honorable Statesman Lyndon H. LaRouche, Jr., a man who is a prognosticator and put it in writing and has never been found wrong. Thank you.
I would like to begin by asking the first question. And the first question is simply this. Mr. LaRouche, how would you answer the question, who is Lyndon LaRouche?
Well, I can say that I came out of the World War II period. I was stationed in India and Burma during the concluding period in the war and shortly thereafter. In that period of time, I thought very much about, as the war was coming to an end, I thought about what lay beyond the end of the war. My concern at that time, from that experience and other experiences in life, was to say, what kind of a world do we require to avoid some great conflict to erupt like World War II or something worse later down the line? It was my persuasion that then, though I didn't know what Franklin Roosevelt's exact policies were, it was my persuasion that the following 3 points were crucial to the future of humanity. First, that the British Empire, along with the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the French, must be disbanded at the end of the war to bring to an end those colonial systems, empires, and their legacies, and to free the entire the human population from that legacy, and to establish a community of perfectly sovereign nation states in place of dominant and subjugated nations. Thirdly, that the United States, as Roosevelt had proposed, as in Morocco, where he challenged Prime Minister Churchill on this thing, and laid out with maps showing how the map of Africa would be revolutionized by great infrastructural projects. I didn't know of that at the time, at the end of the war, but that was his policy. And I shared the intent. I was in India
in particular, and I looked at the situation in India. I desired India's freedom. I was an American, but I was an impassioned patriot for the freedom of India from British rule. I saw and met the poorest Indians, coolies earning 4 to 8 annas a day as virtually slave labor for the British during that period. And I saw these very poor, illiterate people asking me as an American soldier that when I returned to the United States, would I, among other Americans, campaign to get machinery for the textile and other industries of India so India could rebuild itself. I shared that. I was happy to hear that kind of plea of me and others from these Indians. It seemed that that's what we had to do as Americans. We had to create, with our great power and influence, we had to mobilize nations to rebuild this planet, to build a system of true economic justice and freedom for all peoples.
The next question comes from Assemblyman Felix Ortiz of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. LaRouche, I have just a follow-up on the previous panel, and it's regarding to the issue of NAFTA and sweatshop in America. Since NAFTA was established, we have lost a lot of these biggest factories and contractor and subcontractor that used to do this garment in USA. And I would like to be very curious about what is your reaction and what will be your policy to be putting in place if you ever get elected as a president of the United States of America, and what will be the result of NAFTA, and how would you work with this particular implementation that was done previously under this administration?
I would cancel NAFTA entirely and everything that goes with that kind of philosophy. For years I've had a special relationship to the Republic of Mexico and was very close to the president, Lopez Portillo of Mexico at the time he was president. Matter of fact, we got into trouble together trying to do the right thing. So I saw from inside Mexico the horrible things that U.S. policy was doing to the people of Mexico. I saw how the development of slave labor in Mexico under U.S. pressure, particularly after 1982, was used not only as the Caribbean, non-Puerto Rican, for example, Caribbean populations were often used in, for example, New York, as virtual slave labor in that area, or the similar kind of thing, Mexican immigrants in Southern California, Texas, and so forth. That what we had is a process of using the enslavement of people in the maquiladoras in northern Mexico, which are virtually concentration camps by economic standards. We're spilling that disease by cheap labor, virtual slave labor in Mexico, spilling it over into the United States. It spills up to places like New York City or Los Angeles in particular, as typical of this kind of problem. And then it turns around that the cheap labor is now in the United States, is now forced, in order to try to hold their job, to compete with still cheaper labor from various parts of Asia and so forth. Well, this is crazy. We actually have to have a protectionist policy to guarantee fair wages and fair forms of employment, of modern employment, not slave labor, not physical stoop labor employment, but dignified forms of employment and protected wages. We've got to have that kind of policy, which was formerly the typical American policy. NAFTA, which was posed by the British Commonwealth via Canada, was then with a bunch of people who were too close to Wall Street, dumped the policy on the United States. The United States worsened the conditions greatly in Mexico in the name of providing more jobs. Or what kind of jobs? Slave labor jobs with increased mortality rates, destruction of agriculture, industry. Look what's happening in Mexico now. The place is about to blow up as a result of NAFTA. And in the meantime, we're using the disease that we're imposing on Mexico and other countries. We're importing the disease into the United States. We're killing off our population, criminalizing, brutalizing them. It's not right. And NAFTA must be repealed. We must go back to a traditional American protectionist policy And we need a strong labor movement also to help government through the private sector to enforce fair standards of employment, conditions of employment in the United States itself, and to enforce the kind of protection which our job wage earners and households require.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind. Just on the same issue, when you talk about national minimum wages, and I just came to my top of my head, if you elected, would you put a commission to trying to come out with some kind of resolution at the international level of where the American company are making a contract with the international or the third world to make sure that those people who making garment will be able to make I would say a fair living?
But I do two things. I don't think the minimum wage by itself will not work. You have to create the conditions under which the minimum wage will work. That is a fair minimum wage, not some wild compromise. The way you do that is this. First of all, the first thing we have to do in the United States, we have to rebuild our infrastructure. Look, we're short of power. We're going to blackout and brownout, but now blackout. We see the effects of the lack of water management in terms of the recent drought pattern across the United States and its effect. Nothing is done about it. The destruction of infrastructure in the United States since 1971-72 is a great cause of loss. We have people who have very few skills. They can't qualify to compete on the world market in terms of skills. We have to create, through infrastructure jobs, we have to remedy these problems of shortage of infrastructure. We have to use this job creation as a way of building up a baseline for increase of levels of employment, for increase of standards of employment. We also have to have a sense of national purpose.
And others, classes that he gave on German critical philosophy and many different things. But this is the first video. It's a September 1975 address in Boston. Please take note in this discussion of how the financial establishment goes after and harasses political groups that they can't deal with, including efforts to frame them up with phony charges by the IRS. Rather prescient, I would say, of what happened next. And then the second clip that you'll be seeing as part of this is taken from a 2002 discussion in Los Angeles that LaRouche was having with the second youth movement, which he was recruiting at the time, discussing the differences between the first youth movement and the second youth movement and why they occurred. The third segment you will see is LaRouche in action, organizing in 1999 at a Schiller Institute conference in Oberwesel, Germany. So the second video clip, please.
First of all, I think very few people, even in the labor committees themselves as such, realize in comprehensive terms the extent to which we are shaping world policy. Now, we're doing it in two ways. We're not determining world policy, but our interventions are critically shaping world policy, just as the IDB did. As the world policy on development, economic cooperation, is shaped in a way in which it would not otherwise be shaped as a result of the IDB and related interventions. That policies on military questions are shaped in part because of our intervention on this question, particularly this past spring, and so forth. Now, the context of our influence is the issue of debt. This is the reason why we're in danger of a war, is the debt. Now, let me just indicate what we're up against first. How we're going to intervene is determined by what we're up against. See, imperialism is essentially, as Luxemburg described it, is a system of international loans which is imposed by might and politics upon the world. So Anglo-American intelligence, political intelligence, working out of policy-making think tanks,
where they would decide what the policy was going to be, and then they would go to the pitiful little running errand boys like the Republican and Democratic Party machines and saying, okay, boys, if you want your money, your goodies, you don't want to get framed up, busted, killed, etc., this is the policy you will implement. And that's the way the world has been run. Now that's what we're up against. The world has been run by an invisible government, increasingly since the late 1870s and 1880s. And Rockefeller is the king of the invisible empire. The idea that you can go down on the basis of having the support of a large constituency and go up to the invisible government or its representatives out in front, in the front office, and say, look, I represent so many people, we want this, therefore you got to give it to us. You're foolish. You're silly. You're a dope. You don't understand politics. See, because the essential thing is, if that's all you've got, the guy is going to say, hey, you know, I got a little problem. I got this bunch of jerks out here, and they got 20% of my constituency, and they're demanding this. Now, how the hell am I going to screw them? And somebody will say, well, why don't you call up so-and-so? He knows how to deal with these situations. Get some organizers in there and screw the whole thing up. Arrest a couple of people or frame them up. Let's call up the IRS and see what we can do with them. I got a friend up there in the drug enforcement aspect of the police. We'll put a drug rap on a couple of these guys. That'll sort of scare everybody. It's very easy, right? Because we are prepared to govern. We proceed from understanding what has to be done with the world. We're prepared to do that, and we also know what the status is of the lineup on the current fights around these relevant issues. We know what the game is, how the game is being played generally, and what has to be done today, tomorrow, and so forth in different parts of the world. I was doing this in teaching in 1966 to 1973. I was dealing with a different population than exists today. In that time, the population was the baby boomer generation, was going through university, secondary school. And they were really, shall we say, deeply into Freud. And they were deeply into Marx, one way or the other. Everybody thought they knew about Marx. They didn't read the books, but they would sometimes take a few phrases out of this secondhand or something, and they'd quote that all over the place. But the problem today is different. The society today is existentialist, which is a transition from that. Society today is, you know, how many people can you kill? I mean, everyone you hate, and plus a few besides, just in case you might hate them. So that there's that kind of fundamental difference. Today the question is this, is absolute lack of education in the public school system and the universities, real education. It's an existentialist society, which people have no sense of any connection. They don't feel connected. They don't have connections. They have disconnections. And my concern is to get, I say, the only approach is to go inside people of your age, for example, to get inside and to touch on the question of definitions of what is humanity. What's the difference between man and a monkey? How do you fit into society? How do you get some control in society? What's your future going to be? And it's how to get people out of this sense of, I don't know anything, I just have these impulses. Or I'm in this subculture and I have this influence. And to get people to find their human identity as human beings. And that's the thing today, is to get at humanity as such, as opposed to existentialist rejection of humanity, the baselessness. So the problem today is different, as you see right here, among the discussions here. In former times, you would have a so-called discussion of science. It might not have been worth too much. Today, you don't have any real discussion of science at all. You don't have any education in the school system to worry about. There's nothing going on there except brainwashing. No education to speak of. So therefore, my problem is, how do I get people in your age group, especially because you've got to move the older people. You know, they've decided they're headed toward the grave prematurely. I don't feel like that. But these younger guys, they're prematurely dead or determined to become dead. And you're going to have to move them and bring them back to life. And they will, because they respect you. You're important to them. You are their future, and therefore they have to respond to you. But my job is to get to you, and to get others to get to you, and to awaken in you an awareness of what we might call knowledge, what it is to be human, and to make it your own, not something that you're able to recite in an examination, but something you know, you own it. And that's my job right now. Different times, different circumstances. Principles remain the same. Circumstances have changed. This is the method of science, and this is the method of classical art. And when you look at this in this way, what is the result? You look at the history of Western civilization, European civilization, as it's been extended worldwide. What do? You say, where did the civilization begin? For what do you look? Let's take the case of this fellow, Thieme, up at Göttingen, who wrote this paper on a discovery in a deep mine in Germany, where they discovered artifacts which demonstrated that at least 400,000 years ago, in Germany, oh boy, the British won't like that, someone had crafted throwing spears whose crafting showed that they had discovered principles, something that no ape can do, including Prince Philip. He professes to be an ape, therefore obviously he's stupid. He's an animal. He says he's an animal. He says his son is an animal. And after all, he ought to know. Maybe it's because of him, maybe it's because of the girl he married. But somebody's responsible for the fact that poor Charles is merely an animal, according to his father. And he should know. I mean, he signed the papers. It makes it official. How do you know the difference? That this was a man who had these spears, not an ape. How do you know that? By looking at the specimen of the man? By subjecting him to a gene test? By getting biologists to come in and look at the evidence? No. You can't learn very much from the biological evidence to distinguish between a great ape and a human being. What's the difference between an ape and a human being? The human being is capable of Socratic forms of cognition. The ape is not. How do we know this was a human being 400,000 years ago? Because the product of his hand was the fruit of a mind with cognition, or minds with cognition. How do we develop our children when we develop them? By instilling in them, through the forms of nurture and education, to stimulate their Socratic powers of cognition. Therefore, what is history? Well, monkeys have no history. Apes have no history. Perhaps British monarchy has no history. Or maybe no future history. Man has a history because we owe to our predecessors the ability to reenact those discoveries of universal principle and the validation of those discoveries of principle upon which we depend. It's the foundation for what we can do. It's what we gain by reenacting the discoveries passed down to us as fruits of cognition by previous generations. So the history of the human species, the history of people, is not the history of their biological descent. It is the history of cognition, the history of an ongoing Riemannian type of manifold, of aggregation, of universal principles, physical principles, and classical artistic principles, including the principles, classical artistic principles of politics, which have been passed down to us from one generation to another. The history of man, the history of a people, is a history of ideas.
I don't know who is this working now? Yes. I don't know who the cameraman was there, or camera woman. It was jerky at points, but whoever it was, we give them special thanks. So now, for the third clip, you are going to see and hear Lyndon LaRouche in action recruiting his second youth movement in the early 2000s. It began on the West Coast in Los Angeles, somewhat San Francisco, Seattle, and so on. And it then spread east and really consolidated over the course of this entire period with the in-depth scientific work carried out by the so-called basement scientific team, which, under Lynn's direct supervision, created and wielded a superlative weapon against the combined stupidity and immorality of most of that generation, like all generations. And you will see LaRouche in the process of doing this in what is a rather raucous youth cadre school in Los Angeles in August 2002, where the youth peppered LaRouche with every imaginable question under the sun about the meaning of life, the meaning of their life, the meaning of political activity, and the future that they would be choosing for themselves and, by extension, for the world and the universe on the basis of the ideas that LaRouche presented there. So let's join in with Lynn in this process.
So I think the most orderly thing to do is I'll just arbitrarily pick people out who have questions. But raise your hand and identify yourself, and let's take as many questions as we have time for.
I have a question about the privatization issue. Should it has several parts to it. Should the resources of the land belong to the federal government? And if so, where do you draw the line between the ownership by private interests versus the government? And then, should there be a government initiative to develop private industrial sectors, like automotive sector, steel industry, etc.? And what are the general guidelines for the cooperation?
Okay. Well, first of all, there is no such thing as an inherent ownership of land by an individual. That does not exist. There's no such right. What does exist is the right created by governments to entitle people to hold land as in a property form under certain conditions. What the nature of man is, we all die. Now, if you're all going to die, where does the property go when you die? So what's your interest in property? Your interest in property is, first of all, use. The right of use, the access to use of something. A right given to you under certain conditions by society, and a right which is protected by society under these conditions. More importantly, what happens to you after you die? What does it all mean? There was this famous cartoon by a famous cartoonist for the New Yorker many years ago, Abner Dean. And he drew this cartoon depicting a horde of mourning people, all naked, lining the sidewalks while a glass coffin was being carried down, and the corpse was lying in the coffin, such, and the caption was, "I wonder what that was all about." A very telling, one of the better cartoons, I think, of modern culture. Huh? What's the meaning of life? What makes the difference between a man and an animal? Human beings can have ideas. Baboons do not. Baboons may have more nuts. Huh? All right, what are ideas? Take the history. If, as I've said often again, if man were a higher ape, which is what the idiots say he is, academic idiots, British idiots, brutish idiots say he is, then the human population of this planet would never have exceeded several million individuals under the conditions which have existed during a span of at least 2 million years. So how do we have several billion people now? Our species, if we were a baboon or a higher ape, would never be capable of that. What's the difference? Ideas. A baboon cannot develop an idea. Culture is the transmission of discovered ideas from one generation person to another over successive generations. The power of mankind to improve his power as a species over nature comes from the transmission and accumulation of these ideas. It is this social process of linking the minds together in terms of ideas. Then you think of yourself. You say, okay, I'm going to die. What happens to what I've done after I die? Have I made a contribution? What do I think the future of mankind must be after I'm gone? How must I be seen 3 generations ahead after I'm dead? When you can think in that way, you begin to be truly human. And it's only when you think in that way that questions of the type that you pose around property can be properly answered. The question is, our interest lies in humanity, the human species, which we call as a creature made in the image of the creator of the universe. Why do we say so? We have proof. Because mankind has a power, the power of ideas which no other species except the creator has. We not only are able to change our relationship to nature, we are able to change nature. Some people say the sun will die and we will go with it some billions of years from now. I say no, not if I'm around. Or if somebody who thinks like I does intervenes in the process. We are going to control more and more of the universe. Just the way we improve land, the way we improve other things, we are going to improve the universe. That's our mission. Our mission is to manage the universe. Our mission is to be, in a sense, the servant of God in managing the universe. We must keep that work going. Our mission in life is to keep that work going, to make progress. And therefore, we should give to ourselves and our people certain instruments of authority which they require to do their job, to raise their family, to conduct an enterprise which is useful for society, to perform some other function which is useful for society. And they must have the right and the sovereignty in that matter to do their job. So essentially, under the American system of political economy, as defined by Alexander Hamilton and others, we divide the economy of society into 2 general categories: the public sector and the private sector. In the public sector, we must provide those things which are absolutely necessary to society. That is, the government must assure that these conditions are provided and these improvements are provided. But as you see in the problem of the Soviet system, that does not work by that means alone. You must also unleash the potential of the individual intellect in ways we associate with private entrepreneurship. I'm not talking about shareholders. Shareholders are parasites. They're not entrepreneurs. A shareholder says, I want my profit. The entrepreneur doesn't think that way. The entrepreneur thinks in terms, I must do something for society. I want to do this for society. I want to make things better, and in the process do something for my family. And therefore, I need certain freedom. Give me the freedom. Give me the right of property, and I will try to do things that will improve society, because the true entrepreneur is always trying to make something better. And the true entrepreneur is always thinking in terms of principles principles and technologies derived from principles, how to make something better. And by making them free to innovate, rather than having some mass production of approved ideas, by giving them the freedom to innovate as they choose, society benefits by having they do it on their own. They don't have to be given a government order to do it. They'll do it because they think it's the right thing to do. They'll put themselves at risk to do the job because they think it's the right thing for them to do. And that's how society progresses. That's what the role of the true entrepreneur in American society, in American economy, has been. The large corporation has been chiefly a parasite. All the great work in the private sector in society has been done by the entrepreneur, who is generally, the number of employees in an entrepreneurship generally doesn't exceed much between 100 and 150 people. It's a privately held firm which detests the stock market. No entrepreneur wants to be a prisoner of the stock market. They don't want Wall Street to control them. They want independent financing responsibility, independent capital. They would like a loan with a local bank, but they don't want to be in hock to Wall Street because they know what that means. I've seen it. Also, you see another thing. In my experience in consulting and observations based on that, I've seen many cases in which an entrepreneurship was successful. The entrepreneur died or was pushed out of the firm by the family. Hey, you're getting too old. Move over and make room for us. The firm almost invariably went bankrupt because the factor of success in the entrepreneurship was the entrepreneur himself as a leader, as an originator of ideas. The heirs or the successors came in thinking like accountants. And an accountant doesn't know how to run a business. An accountant is like an undertaker. You call him in only after the business has failed. So into this condition, the entrepreneurship and the question of the private family's right to a private holding for the purpose of raising a family in successive generations, that is a protected right. It's not an absolute right. It's a protected right by prudent societies as opposed to other forms. And it's one we should defend on that basis, but with having no illusion about some inherent natural property right. There is no natural property right. So what we did is we now loot the world various ways. By the IMF is the chief instrument. We arbitrarily go into a country and devalue its currency. Why? How is the currency devalued? It's by orders. By orders of international monetary authorities controlled by the British and the United States, chiefly. We devalue a currency. We arbitrarily increase the debt. Therefore, we loot the countries. We demand collection of debt. We take resource after resource, sell it to Anglo-American speculators and others, buy up the country, leave nothing for the people. So here we sit fat and happy, but not so happy, and too fat. We sit here living on other people's labor. We're parasites. Our current account deficit. We're sucking the blood of the world. How do we keep our markets up? We attract, by various mechanisms, we attract vast floods of financial investment in U.S. markets. We drive the market up. We print money like crazy. We get the Japanese to print crazy money, not play money, crazy money, to buy dollars. What the Japanese do overnight, they issue a loan, a so-called zero interest rate loan. With this loan is now denoted in yen. The yen-denoted loan is used to buy dollars or European currencies. Most of those yen as dollars come into the United States as dollar deposits or investments in the United States. Japan total bank system is totally bankrupt as a result of this. Japan's industries are contracting. Japan is a nation which depends upon imported raw materials to survive. It cannot survive on its own internal resources. It is not earning income from areas in which those resources exist. When the Japanese yen drops, Japan is in a crisis. Japan goes into a crisis beyond belief. The United States has now experienced a drop in its ability to maintain the current account deficit. The Bush administration has done the worst possible things in response to the crisis with its tax cut and other measures. This was absolute insanity. With the flow of funds into the United States is dropping. Only the central banks and printing press money is coming in to keep the market from collapsing. It's not because of what other countries are doing, it's what we're doing. This is a collapsing, doomed economy. This is the Roman Empire at the end phase. And we're trying to establish a worldwide military empire at the time we've lost the empire at home. So what we did is we have other people in other parts of the world as so-called cheap labor, supplying cheap products given to us by these means, for which we're not paying, as the current account deficit accounts. We're maintaining the appearance of income in the United States through debt, like mortgage debt in speculation, because people are hawking their mortgages for second, third terms to the benefit of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in order to get purchasing power for family income expenditures. When those houses come down in value, these people will have no job. They'll have a mortgage that can never be paid. They'll be evicted, and you will have mass evictions and mass ghost towns in areas where you now have Hollywood-style, plastic-covered tar paper shacks going at $500,000 to $1 million up in so-called nominal value. That's what's happened to us. We have become like the Roman Empire. We brought about our own destruction over the past 35 years by allowing ourselves to change from the most productive economy in the world. And the issue here is, do we say that no human being can be property, and that no part of the world can be its resources can be the property of some other part of the world by some kind of slave-like property right? If we say that, then all the garbage is cleared away, because all the problems are double talk around that issue. Now, for example, Henry Kissinger's a racist. He's a racist like Hitler. We can prove it out of his own writings. We can prove it out of official U.S. documents. Would you see him on television being treated as respectable? The man's a mass killer and a racist. He proposes genocide against the people of Africa, South America, and so forth.
So for those of you who have been losing sleep, worried about what's going to happen to the sun a couple of million years from now, I think you can rest assured, because Lynn will be around. So I think we're okay. We now turn to the fourth and last clip of this panel presentation by Lyndon LaRouche. This is a dialogue that Lynn had with youth just 2 weeks later. This was at a meeting in Washington, D.C., at a Schiller Institute conference a lot like this one. And it ends, as you will see, with a little surprise. This may be especially significant for the younger members of this audience who, perhaps over the course of this day and a half, have been wondering why they are here, and you're about to find out why.
Well, what we're going to do for the next approximately hour and 45 minutes is have a discussion on the initiative Lynn took 2 weeks ago in Los Angeles, where he simultaneously launched the International Revolutionary Youth Movement along with the National Emergency Infrastructure Program. And so I'm sure people have read about this, have had some questions, and have had a lot of questions come up over the conference. So what we'd like to do is have maximum amount of time for questions and answers. Lynn, do you want to open with anything?
You become from a no future generation.
And most of you here know it. There is no future staring at you out there. And so therefore you're going to have to fight to get a future. And to get the future, you're going to have to force a lot of old fogies between 35 and 45 and something higher, prematurely senile, get them out of their torpor and get them moving. You've got to shake them up. In a sense, that's what's going to make it work. That to actually move to victory. Nice sound, huh? Victory. To move to that, you actually cannot move to victory as the youth movement. You can move as a nation to victory. It's a little more difficult than it used to be, but the principle is still the same. You are their future. You are the future of your grandparents. You're the future of your parents. The future of the justification of their existence. And that's your weapon. And what you're going to do by being what you are, you're going to organize them. Or that generation. Maybe not your parents, you get somebody else to do your parents. And then you do somebody else's parents. But the same is the same. The way that's going to work is you've got a dead population, morally dead. The baby boomer generation are walking corpses. They're not quite dead, so you can't bury them. But they're still walking around. And, you know, it's not like Dracula. They're going to fly at night, whatever. So you've got to get them back to life. You've got to get them moving. And you've got to sort of shame them into it.
And I'd like to thank you for I guess, for the opportunity of knowing what it means to be human, and knowing that as a personal discovery. My question is regarding the human soul. In my organizing, I've met all types of people, and it's been a rewarding experience. My understanding of human nature has greatly grown and developed. Many people I've met in my organizing claim to be religious, and some even devoutly so. However, many of these same people are not political. They don't work to change people's minds, to organize others towards a mutual benefit, towards the betterment of all humankind. From my perspective, my understanding of what the soul is, if these people aren't working in the service of good, their soul is of a clearly inferior quality. Yet they cite Scripture and claim that their piety will somehow be rewarded. What do I say to these people to snap them out of their insane fantasy? And can I tell these people that they're going to hell?
No. The smart answer would be they're probably already there. And if you told them they were already in hell, if you told them they were going to hell, they'd be angry. If you told them they're already living there, they'd say, how did you know? The question of immortality, this is a very crucial thing, which is dealt with by Plato especially, famously, and dealt with brilliantly as a reprise of Plato by Moses Mendelssohn. And my view of the thing, I'm more pleased with my view than either Plato's or Moses Mendelssohn's. Well, because I know it myself. You see, that's probably the big advantage. If you know something yourself rather than knowing what somebody's told you, or tried to replicate what they thought, it's sometimes easier. But if you can create a discovery, and if you not only create a discovery which enabled you to improve man's mastery of the universe, but you know that the transmission of such discoveries from one generation to the next as an experience of discovery is what enables the human race to progress. And the lack of such discoveries or denial of such discoveries is what causes the human race to fail. Then you have a sense that
living in your space and your time and acting creatively is an immortal act. Because if you take mankind as a whole, the universality of mankind is man's development. If you are contributing to the development of the human species, you are reaching back to justify those who came before you, because you are an outcome of them. And by improving the outcome of their life, of which you are a part, you're making their life more meaningful. If they were slaves and you were free, and you do something which is unslave-like, you free them from slavery, not in the flesh, but in the meaning of their lives. So you can now change the meaning of the lives of people who went before you by doing good deeds which give their life a better meaning, a better outcome than they were able to enjoy while they were alive. Huh? So this gives you a sense of what immortality is. It's being a part of a universality, which is immediately the human species. You are working to make it better, the human species better. Anything you contribute to the human species is forever, past and future. Therefore, you have a sense of immortality. The Calvinists of Geneva were largely Cathars. Calvin was a Cathar. Mandeville was a Cathar. Adam Smith's doctrine is that of the Cathars. John Locke, doctrine, Cathar. Jonathan Edwards, the United States, the Great Awakening, Cathar doctrine. What's the doctrine? The doctrine is, you're a no good. You're not worth anything. It doesn't mean what you do. If God in his stupidity and blindness chooses to love you and adopt you, everything will be done for you. Now, who's God? Well, God is a little guy who lives under the floorboards of the universe. And when the dice are thrown, he fixes the dice so that you become rich and the other guy gets poor. That is the religion, the kind of religion you're talking about. The religion, if you do this, if you join this organization and say these magic words and go through this ritual, you're going to be taken care of. Not in this life. Maybe in this life. Maybe we'll have the Battle of Armageddon, you won't have to pay the rent next month. Or something like that. So it's that kind of stupid people who are faced with anxiety, who feel their lives are worthless, want to feel important. And somebody comes along and says, if you believe this, and if you believe it hard enough, if you get down on your knees and really believe it, you will imagine it's going to happen. And that's what you want. So it's a form of mass entertainment of this type, pernicious type. So my view on the matter is dealing with people like that. Don't bother arguing with them with their silly nonsense. Tell them the truth. Everybody dies. So you've got to don't wait until after you're dead to find out if it worked out. Get a hold on it now. What's the hold on it now? Is to know that you have immortality. Real immortality. Human immortality. Not some deal sold to you by an out-of-work used car salesman.
I saw a documentary recently about mass female sterilization experiments done in Puerto Rico. And this was done over the period of time between the 1920s and the 1970s. They also tested methods of birth control on these women, which are much stronger than what is used today. And so what I'm wondering is, as U.S. citizens, which these people are, like, how was that allowed to go on for so long over the heads of the American public?
Because Puerto Rico was chosen as an experimental ground, together with many of the other Caribbean islands, for various kinds of sociological and medical experiments. One of this was the birth control experiment. This was done early on and was done as a part of what became Kissinger's NSSM 200. The idea was, we're going to reduce the population. We're going to use birth control. We're going to find out what the effects of using birth control are. Because the population of Puerto Rico had shall we say, a high propensity for producing babies. And this is not merely producing a number of babies, this involves a cultural tradition, a family tradition in families of a people of a culture. Their idea of having a large number of children, having a family, was very important to them. And so what the experimenters were interested in were the psychological effects of birth deprivations as well as birth control. Also, the Caribbean islands were used, including Puerto Rico, as a part of this, were used as a place for conducting medical experiments which would have been considered crimes in the United States. This involved drug experiments, it involved psychological torture experiments and so forth of various kinds. So that what happened is that many of the things that have happened to the United States were done as experiments in Puerto Rico or adjoining islands, where they could get by with murder or worse. And this was a basis for defining much of the social policy and psychological policy and psychological control policy in the United States. Now, similar things were done in Africa. African populations were used for human experiments. And the worry was that HIV may have come out of some of the way the experiments were done on immunization in Africa, that you might have actually produced a species jump from green monkeys to human beings by the way things were being done in Africa. So this is the general problem, is we have crimes are being committed and have been for a long time, and Puerto Rico was treated as a place where they could get by with it, because you had one section of the Puerto Rican population which was convinced it was an oligarchy. They had this idea they were a Spanish oligarchy. And they looked at the rest of the population as being peasants, for whom they had contempt in practice as well as in attitude. And they were completely indifferent to what might be done to these poor people in that island. They didn't care. So you had a small group from the state side controlling this operation, running these experiments. And the birth control experiment, which is referred to, is typical of that. It was an experiment, a sociological experiment on both how to launch birth control and how to get benefit from the curious side effects of an imposed change of culture in a population. Mean, nasty.
Hello, Lynn. Hello, Elga. Seeing you up in Beverly. Well, I'm from France, and we came with a little crew from France here to bring back home the American Revolution, #2. Or maybe it's the same, I don't know. So we were having a meeting with Elga and the youth of Europe, and there was friends of yours, Erin, Dave, people like that, and they told us, just do it. Well, okay. So we are here. We are here.
This is a political organization. Everybody organizes. And the people who have this experience or this situation will organize as the best they can under a general centralized idea of what the policy is. And the policy can change very rapidly from day to day based on the reality. It's like fighting a war. You don't say, we're stuck with this master war plan. You can't deviate from it. You say, okay, the enemy has exposed a flank. Ha, 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 we're going to hit it. Now, what we said yesterday, forget it. We're going to hit this thing today. He sticks his flank out, we're going to kick it. That's the order of the day. But we have to use our judgment in how we do it. This old, stodgy, mechanistic, by the rules, it doesn't work. It never worked. The only order in this thing is using the mind and being intelligent and not being stupid. It's not wrong not to know something. It's wrong to sit around and not do something about what you don't know, about correcting that obsession. So we be flexible, aggressive, sly, clever, honest, all those good things. And we just have to work at it and devise our tactics as we go along based on the readings we're getting. Because you're going to get opportunities I couldn't anticipate, you couldn't anticipate, you're going to have to respond to them. We're going to have to decide how to respond. We'll discuss it. Someone say, well, when's the next conference? What do you mean? We're going to discuss it tomorrow. And that's the way we'll do it. So that's the key of this thing, is high degree of flexibility, aggressive, imaginative. We're in this war to win, and we kick flank.
I just want to say this, that the biggest threat to a youth movement would be to assume that what has happened in the last year or 2 years would be an extension for the future. Because we are truly in a revolutionary period, and I think people have sometimes a difficulty on the basis of past experiences, what didn't work then, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that then people tend to say, oh, don't have illusions, this doesn't work, and this puts on a dampening thing, which is crazy, because my experience is the total opposite. Since I have a clear idea both of how the world should look like and also what the crisis is going to be. I don't argue with people from the standpoint of what is now, but from what I know will be the case, in 4 weeks from now, in half a year from now. And when you do that, I mean, you would be surprised how many things we can now get in terms of total breakthroughs. So I think, we really are in a period in which you cannot project your experience from the past into the future, because that is necessarily wrong. You have to truly be, you have to have a vision, what you want, and then you use any flank which opens up. So I think if we proceed this way, I know we can win. And I think there is no alternative to winning, because the alternative is too horrible to accept. So, let's win.